White passenger takes black CEO's seat minutes later. The flight couldn't leave the ground. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. Get up or get out. The words cracked through the cabin like a slap of cold air. Every conversation froze. Forks stopped mid-bite. Even the hum of the engines seemed to retreat into silence. The first-class cabin, all leather, gold trim, and quiet privilege, turned its gaze toward row 2B. A man in a pale blue shirt, his face flushed with entitlement, stood over a woman in a tailored yellow blazer. His hand hovered inches from her shoulder, as if authority itself had granted him permission to touch what he didn't understand. "I said get up," he barked again, louder this time. "That's my seat." The woman didn't flinch. She looked up slowly, her posture still, her voice calm. "Sir, according to my ticket, it isn't." The captain appeared at the aisle, drawn by the disturbance. Behind him, passengers craned their necks, phones rising like black vultures hungry for spectacle. "Is there a problem here?" the captain asked. "There sure is," the man said, gesturing toward her. "She's in the wrong seat. I paid for business class, not a social experiment." A soft gasp rippled through the cabin. The woman's expression didn't change. Only her eyes, sharp, steady, lifted to meet his. "Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here." Now, back to Amara. The flight attendant checked the tickets. Her voice trembled slightly. "Sir, her boarding pass says 2B. Yours is 2C. The man frowned. "That can't be right. I always sit by the window." Amara folded her hands in her lap. "Then perhaps today you'll learn to see from a different angle." Somewhere behind them, a passenger stifled a laugh. The man's jaw tightened. "Don't get smart with me. You people think manners buy respect." You people. 2 words, soaked in history, hit harder than shouting ever could. The captain's tone shifted. "Ma'am, could you please stand so we can sort this out?" Asthmatic tapped 7. Ematted to their body. Amara turned to him, her voice still soft but carved from something unshakable. "Captain, I am seated where I belong, and until someone proves otherwise, I'll remain." The man leaned closer, his breath thick with anger. "You'll regret this." Amara's gaze never wavered. "No," she said. "But you might." The cabin held its breath. The attendant glanced helplessly toward the cockpit. The engines idled, ready to depart. But the air had turned electric, the kind of tension that precedes a storm no radar can predict. Outside the window, the runway shimmered under late sunlight. Inside, 30 strangers watched one woman defend her dignity without raising her voice. And though no one knew it yet, the plane they were so desperate to launch was about to be grounded, not by weather, not by mechanics, but by the weight of a single truth. Power doesn't need to shout to be heard. The captain's words hung in the air, thin and uncertain. "Ma'am, please cooperate." No one breathed. Even the hum of the engines felt suspended in midair. The plane hadn't moved an inch, but something in the atmosphere had shifted. The warmth drained out of the cabin, replaced by a chill that came not from the air conditioning, but from judgment. Amara looked up, her tone still gentle. "I'm cooperating, Captain. I'm simply staying in the seat I purchased." The man beside her scoffed, shaking his head like he'd been personally wronged by gravity. "You must have switched the tags. People like you always find a way to cheat the system." Her eyes didn't flicker. Only her hand moved slowly, deliberately to straighten the lapel of her yellow blazer. "People like me," she repeated softly. The words weren't loud, but they carried. The woman across the aisle lowered her phone. A young passenger behind them whispered, "This is bad." The captain exhaled, clearly out of patience. "Sir, ma'am, let's not turn this into something bigger than it is." "It already is," Amara said, voice calm as steel. "You just can't see it yet." Somewhere down the aisle, a child began to cry. The sound was small, human, grounding. For a second, it made the moment feel almost normal, until the man leaned in again. "Listen," he hissed. If you don't move, I'll have you banned from flying. Her gaze met his, steady as stone. Then I suppose this flight will have to stay right where it is. He laughed sharply, mistaking quiet for weakness. You think you can stop a plane? No, she said, but I can stop everything that moves it. The flight attendant stepped between them, hands raised in nervous mediation. Please, let's just... But her headset buzzed. A frown creased her forehead. She whispered something to the captain. His face shifted surprise, then confusion. He stepped back toward the cockpit, muttering into his radio. The man in blue folded his arms smugly. Finally! Maybe now they'll drag you off. Amara didn't respond. She simply looked out the window, watching the line of planes waiting their turn to depart. Her reflection in the glass looked calm, but her eyes held calculation. Not revenge, not rage, just precision. Minutes passed. The cabin murmured. Passengers shifted in their seats, checking watches. The engine stayed silent. Then the announcement came. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're experiencing a brief operational hold. Please remain seated. Whispers rippled through the rows. The man frowned. Operational hold? For what? The attendant didn't answer. She just glanced toward Amara, the faintest nod of realization in her eyes. The man noticed. What was that? He snapped. What's going on? Amara turned back to him, her expression unreadable. You might want to sit down, Mr. Hensley. He blinked. How do you know my name? Because, she said evenly, you work for the company that forgot who owns this airline. The color drained from his face. Around them, the passengers went utterly still. The moment felt stretched, like time itself was waiting for permission to move again. Outside, the runway lights flickered against the windows, silent witnesses to a lesson that had only begun. And somewhere deep in the cockpit, a message had just landed from corporate headquarters. Flight 827. Hold immediate. Do not depart. Executive verification in process. The plane was grounded, and the man who had shouted, "Get up or get out," was about to learn what happens when arrogance flies too close to ownership. The engines were quiet now, humming only and idle. Flight 827 sat motionless on the runway, a gleaming capsule of confusion and whispers. From first class to economy, the murmurs spread like static. No one knew why they weren't moving, but everyone felt it had something to do with the woman in yellow. Amara Lewis sat perfectly still. Her calm wasn't performance, it was muscle memory. Years of boardrooms, headlines, and silent bias had trained her to master stillness the way others mastered speech. When the world underestimated her, she let it. Silence, after all, was the most efficient disguise. Across the aisle, the man Richard Hensley scrolled through his phone, trying to reach someone at the airline. He muttered curses under his breath. This is ridiculous. I'm a priority member. They can't hold the whole flight for this. A passenger whispered. Maybe they can. Meanwhile, the captain stood just outside the cockpit door, voice low and uneasy as he spoke into his headset. Headquarters is confirming an executive alert, he said. Apparently, someone on board has triggered an internal compliance lockout. The co-pilot frowned. That's above our clearance. Who would even have that code? The captain's gaze drifted toward 2B. Someone who doesn't need to shout to be obeyed. Back in the cabin, Amara scrolled through her own phone. One message, one word. Verified. She locked the screen. No drama, no smirk, just purpose. She turned her head slightly, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Hensley, do you often travel with such confidence? He shot her a look. Confidence? Try status. I've earned my place. idesexcellable.com did end. Her eyes held his for a moment, measured, clinical. So have I. He laughed, uneasy. You? What do you do? Depends who's asking, she said. I'm asking, he replied, still trying to reclaim the upper hand. She smiled faintly. Then perhaps you should have asked before taking my seat. The attendant approached cautiously, a tablet trembling in her hands. Miss Lewis, she said quietly. Corporate just confirmed your identity. The captain would like to speak with you privately. The name hit the air like a spark in dry grass. A few passengers exchanged glances. One of them whispered, Lewis, as in Lunaris Holdings? The attendant nodded. The whisper became a wave. Phones lifted again. Someone typed into Google. The results were instant. The woman sitting in 2B wasn't a passenger at all. She was the founder and majority owner of Lunaris Holdings, the parent company that owned 37% of the airline. Hensley's face drained of color. You're... Amara stood, smoothing her blazer, every movement graceful, deliberate. Yes, she said, and right now, this plane doesn't move without my permission. The captain approached, his tone a mixture of respect and apology. Miss Lewis, I had no idea. You weren't supposed to, she said gently, but you can make sure your staff knows the difference between procedure and prejudice. He nodded quickly, the weight of understanding settling in his posture. Amara turned back to Hensley. You thought I was in your way. The truth is, you were standing in mine. The cabin was silent, the kind of silence that rewrites memory. People who had laughed now looked away. The woman who had filmed earlier slowly lowered her phone. Even the crying child from before had gone quiet, as if sensing the shift in gravity. Amara stepped back into her seat, calm, composed. Now, she said softly, let's see if this plane can finally leave the ground. The captain gave the signal. The engines roared back to life, but no one applauded, no one spoke. They all just watched humbled witnesses to what dignity looks like when it refuses to yield. Outside, the jet began to roll forward, sunlight flashing across the wings like a salute, and somewhere deep inside every passenger, something had shifted, a quiet awareness that the world had just changed altitude. The wheels finally turned, slow and reluctant, as if the aircraft itself understood that no ordinary takeoff could erase what had just unfolded. The engines roared to life again, but the sound no longer felt powerful, it sounded like apology. Passengers sat frozen in the thick air of realization. Some looked at Amara with awe, others with guilt. A few tried to meet her gaze and then thought better of it. The cabin had become a silent classroom, and everyone knew who the teacher was. Richard Hensley stared at the floor. The color had drained completely from his face. His voice, once sharp and entitled, was now a low, broken whisper. I didn't know who you were. Amara didn't turn toward him. She kept her eyes on the clouds gathering beyond the window. You weren't supposed to know, she said quietly. Decency shouldn't depend on information. The words landed heavier than turbulence. The captain's voice broke through the speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We've received final clearance for takeoff. Estimated flight time, 13 hours. Please remain seated as we prepare for departure. That is Lime and his settering arm, even many one. No one moved. They just watched her. The plane lifted off the runway, slicing through sunlight. As it climbed, Amara leaned back, exhaled slowly, and closed her eyes. She wasn't resting. She was remembering. Her grandmother's hands rough from decades of cleaning houses she could never afford. Her first job interview, where the recruiter had smiled and said, "We're looking for someone who fits our culture." The bank manager who told her to try somewhere more modest when she applied for her first business loan. Every insult, every polite exclusion, every seat she had been told she didn't deserve, they had all led here. She opened her eyes again. Richard was still staring. You could have had me removed, he said softly. You could have ruined me right there. Amara's gaze was steady. Ruin is easy. Understanding takes work. He hesitated. Are you going to report me? He said it evenness. She tilted her head slightly. Why would I need to? You've already told the whole world who you are. His breath caught. He hadn't noticed the woman across the aisle, quietly filming. The video had already traveled from seat to seat, device to device, until it reached the front of the plane, a living timeline of arrogance undone. The attendant approached cautiously. Miss Lewis, she said, corporate asked if you'd like to make a statement. The media's already calling. Amara shook her head. No statements. Let the silence speak. The attendant nodded, retreating with reverence. The cabin lights dimmed. The hum of altitude filled the space again, but it wasn't peaceful. It was reflective, the sound of a collective conscience. Halfway through the climb, Amara pulled out her tablet. Her assistant's message blinked. Lunaris HQ. PR already managing the narrative. #number seat of power trending. Want a comment? She typed one sentence. Respect isn't situational. Then hit send. Below her, the world shrank into ribbons of ocean and light. Inside, the same man who had shouted, "Get up or get out," now sat small, contained by his own awareness. Amara sipped her water, set the glass down, and adjusted the cuff of her sleeve. Her reflection in the dark window met her gaze composed, deliberate, unbroken. When the flight leveled off, the captain came by once more, his voice low. On behalf of the crew, ma'am, I'd like to apologize. She smiled faintly. Apology accepted, she said. Just make sure the next woman doesn't have to earn it first. He nodded, eyes down. Yes, ma'am. As he walked away, Amara looked out into the endless blue. The plane soared higher, the clouds parting like a curtain. Somewhere between sky and silence, she whispered to herself, some seats are fought for, others are built. And for the first time since takeoff, the flight truly began to rise. Hours passed, but the tension never truly left the cabin. Even with the engines steady and the sky wide open, something still hovered in the air, a quiet reckoning. Every passenger aboard Flight 827 had become part of a story that would travel farther than the plane itself. Amara sat composed, her tablet resting on the tray table. She wasn't scrolling through news feeds or emails. She was reading reports, silent updates from her headquarters in New York. Each line was clean, efficient, surgical. Lunaris Holdings. Internal investigation initiated. Airline PR preparing official statement. Video trending across major platforms. She scrolled once more, paused at a headline already circulating on social media. Passenger confronts Black CEO, flight delayed after ownership revealed. She exhaled through her nose, a sigh more weary than proud. This wasn't victory. It was exposure of something deeper than one man's prejudice. Across the aisle, Richard Hensley was still silent, hands clasped tight, eyes unfocused. The arrogance that had once filled his voice was gone, replaced by something closer to shame. Every few minutes he checked his phone again, but the signal flickered. He couldn't escape the altitude or the truth. Finally, he spoke, barely above a whisper. Miss Lewis, I saw the video. It's everywhere. My company's board is calling for an emergency meeting. She didn't look up. They should. Image management has a cost. He swallowed. I'll lose my job. Is Workley? Maybe, she said softly. You'll find a better one that doesn't pay in arrogance. He looked at her, searching for anger, but found none. Just quiet resolve, like a mirror reflecting his own collapse. I didn't mean, he started, then stopped himself. No, I did. I meant every word until I realized who you were. That's the problem, Amara said. People only measure their words when they think they're speaking upward. Silence again. Outside, the sun slid toward the horizon, staining the clouds a deep crimson, the kind of red that looks like consequence. From the back of the cabin came the faint sound of typing. Reporters were already drafting their pieces. Headlines would follow before they even landed. Airline faces scrutiny. CEOs grace under fire. The world was watching from 35,000 feet. Amara opened another file. It wasn't about the flight, it was about him. She read quietly. Richard Hensley, VP Communications, Stratwell Media Group. A company with pending contracts under Lunaris Holdings review. Her thumb hovered over the screen, then tapped forward to her assistant with one note. Pause all negotiations. Initiate ethics review. She didn't need revenge. The system would handle it. Power didn't need to roar, it only needed precision. A few rows away, a woman whispered to her husband. She didn't even raise her voice. He nodded. That's what makes it worse for him. The seatbelt light blinked on as turbulence rocked the cabin gently, almost like the sky itself wanted to emphasize the point. The captain's calm voice filled the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, please fasten your seatbelts. We're passing through a brief weather pocket. The plane dipped slightly. Gasps, murmurs. Amara's hand remained steady on the armrest. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one already unfolding online. When the shaking stopped, she looked back at Richard. Sometimes turbulence isn't punishment, she said quietly. It's correction. He gave a small broken nod. You don't need to worry. I won't make excuses. Good, she said, turning back to the window. Excuses keep people grounded. Below them, the ocean shimmered under streaks of light. Above them, the clouds began to thin. Her tablet buzzed again, a new notification. Global News Network requests interview. She typed 2 words in response. No comment. Some truths didn't need headlines. They needed memory. As she closed her eyes, the cabin lights dimmed to a soft amber glow. The passengers around her adjusted quietly, each one carrying a private reflection of what they'd witnessed. The flight attendants whispered near the galley, their tones reverent. She didn't have to do anything, one said. She just sat there, and everything changed. And as the plane moved through the darkening sky, Amara's calm face reflected in the window. Steady, silent, unyielding, a reminder that justice, when it finally arrives, rarely raises its voice. Morning had begun to bloom beneath the clouds by the time Flight 827 began its slow descent. The world below was still asleep, but the one online was wide awake. The story had gone global. Millions of views, hundreds of headlines, endless commentary. Amara hadn't opened a single notification. She didn't need to. Her assistant, Miles, had already compiled a summary in her inbox titled Fallout. She read it once without expression. The numbers were staggering. Stock movement, statements, resignations. The ripple effect of one moment of prejudice had reached corporate boardrooms before sunrise. Across from her, Richard Hensley was staring into the dark screen of his phone. The battery had died hours ago, but he still held it like a talisman, the last link to a life he knew was crumbling. The arrogance had drained completely. What was left was something closer to recognition. He spoke quietly. "You've destroyed me." Amara's gaze remained on the clouds. "No," she said softly. "You did that the moment you thought power had a color." He swallowed. "You could have stopped this." "I did stop it," she replied. "I stopped it before it went further than you could handle. You'll survive, but the world will remember." The captain's voice broke through the tension. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our initial descent into Tokyo. Please prepare for landing." The cabin stirred. Seatbelts clicked. But the atmosphere stayed fragile, like glass balancing on air. From the front row, a journalist who'd been quietly observing spoke up. "Miss Lewis, if I may, the world is calling this the seat of power incident. They're saying it's about race, class, and silence. What do you think it's really about?" Amara looked at her, the faintest smile playing at the corner of her lips. "It's about discipline," she said, "knowing when to speak and when to let truth reveal itself." The journalist nodded, scribbling furiously. But Amara wasn't performing. She didn't need an audience. She'd already shifted the stage. As the plane dipped lower, sunlight streamed through the windows, washing the cabin in gold. The passengers blinked against the light, as if waking from a long, collective dream. Richard's hands trembled slightly. "What happens now?" Amara closed her tablet. "Now, people start asking better questions about who gets believed, who gets dismissed, and why." The tires kissed the runway. A soft thud, followed by a long exhale of reverse thrust. The sound carried finality. When the seatbelt sign turned off, a hush lingered. No one stood. No one wanted to be the first to leave. Then the intercom crackled again, the captain's voice. Careful. Formal. "Ladies and gentlemen, before disembarking, the airline would like to extend an apology to one of our passengers, Miss Amara Lewis, for the earlier misunderstanding. We thank her for her patience and professionalism." Dozens of heads turned toward her. Some passengers murmured quiet apologies. Others only nodded, ashamed of their own silence hours earlier. Amara rose slowly, gathering her coat and tablet. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. Her expression carried the calm weight of inevitability. At the door, the captain waited, hat in hand. "Miss Lewis, we've been instructed to contact corporate immediately. I assume this means—" "It means you'll get training," she said gently. "Real training, not just procedures." He nodded, relief mixed with gratitude. Richard stood behind her in line, unsure whether to speak. When she turned slightly, he managed to whisper, "I'm sorry." She looked at him for a long moment. "Good," she said. "Now make sure you're never quiet when it happens to someone else." He lowered his eyes. As she stepped off the plane, the flash of cameras met her reporters waiting, microphones raised. She paused only long enough to offer a single line before walking past them. Kindness shouldn't need credentials. The reporters shouted questions. She kept walking. Behind her, the plane stood still on the tarmac, engines cooling, metal groaning in the morning air. A silent monument to everything that had shifted overnight. Not just an aircraft grounded by pride, but a society still learning how to take off. And as Amara disappeared into the sunrise beyond the terminal glass, the world began to write about her, not as a woman wronged, but as the one who stayed seated long enough to change the course of flight itself. By the time Amara's car left Haneda Airport, the story had taken on a life of its own. Screens in the terminal glowed with headlines. CEO confronts prejudice at 30,000 feet. Flight 827, becomes a lesson in power and poise. Outside, Tokyo shimmered beneath morning rain, glass towers reflecting the storm that had followed her across the ocean. Reporters were already broadcasting live, their voices rising over the traffic. "No comment from Miss Lewis yet," one said, but her silence seems louder than any statement. There was Yusel Falden. In the back seat, Amara read the brief from Miles. Public response, 94% positive. Hashtag number seat of power surpasses 60 million views. Corporate inquiries from major airlines requesting ethics consultation. She scrolled to the end of the report, one short line that made her pause. Stratwell Media Group. Board meeting canceled. Hensley terminated effective immediately. She closed the file, resting the tablet on her lap. It wasn't satisfaction she felt, it was inevitability. Miles's voice came through the intercom. "You want to respond officially, Amara?" "No," she said. "Just issue a single statement. 4 words." He waited. She looked out at the city, passing by the faces, the lights, the rush, and spoke clearly. "Grace is not weakness." He smiled faintly on the other end. "That's going to live forever. In mine asylum of the U of Wiles. It flacely deftids, and a grooven says at the same moment, across the ocean, networks replayed the cabin footage. The confrontation, the silence, the reveal. On one split screen, commentators debated race and gender in corporate culture. On another, flight attendants discussed new bias training. What had begun as humiliation had evolved into a cultural mirror, one reflecting the quiet power of restraint. In Chicago, the airline's CEO issued a statement of apology, acknowledging Amara Lewis by name and pledging reform. Their stock dipped for a moment, then climbed higher. Investors, the market, even rivals understood. What she represented wasn't scandal. It was integrity quantified. Meanwhile, in a small apartment on the city's south side, an older woman, gray hair, worn hands, watched the clip on her phone. Her eyes filled with tears. "That's my girl," she whispered. She stayed seated. It is Abada's side was one of the prize, and back in Tokyo, Amara's car stopped at a red light. Outside, a young woman in a business suit recognized her through the window. She didn't speak, didn't ask for a photo. She simply pressed a hand to her heart and mouthed, "Thank you." The light turned green. Amara nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and the car moved on. Above the skyline, the clouds began to break apart, streaks of light cutting through the gray. The day was clearing, but the message remained. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it sits quietly, waiting for the world to understand why it refused to move. By the end of the week, the story had spread far beyond aviation or business headlines. Universities dissected it in ethics classes. News anchors called it the flight that changed corporate culture. And somewhere in the middle of all that noise, Amara Lewis continued her work, calm, silent, precise. At the Lunaris Tokyo office, she stood before a wall of glass overlooking the city. Behind her, her executive team waited for direction. Miles entered quietly, a folder in hand. "We've received partnership requests from 3 airlines," he said. "They want Lunaris to help rebuild their diversity and conduct protocols." Amara didn't turn around. "Do they want to rebuild?" she asked softly. "Or just repair their image?" Miles hesitated. "Both, probably." "Then they can start by changing who sits at their tables," she said. "Send them the criteria. No performative apologies. We build systems, not statements." He nodded, scribbling notes. Her reflection in the glass caught the city's motion traffic gliding below, neon blinking across the Sumida River. The pulse of a world trying to move faster than its conscience. "The problem," she said after a long silence, "is that people treat equality like a PR campaign. But it's supposed to be architecture." Miles smiled faintly. "That's a quote, you know." "Then let them quote it," she replied. "Truth doesn't lose value when it travels." Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. She opened it. "R. Hensley, I watched your interview. I understand now. Thank you for not destroying me." She read it twice, then deleted it, not out of spite, but finality. Some lessons didn't need conversation. Later that evening, she attended a conference on ethical innovation. The moderator introduced her with reverence, a woman who reminded the world that dignity doesn't board last. When she stepped onto the stage, the audience rose to its feet. She lifted a hand lightly. "Sit," she said. Let's have a conversation, not a coronation. As distracted, they laughed softly, respectfully. She spoke about systems, not scandal, about teaching empathy the way corporations teach profit, about turning humiliation into infrastructure. Power, she said, isn't the privilege to dominate. It's the discipline to correct without cruelty. The room fell silent, the kind of silence that listens. Cameras flashed, but she ignored them. This wasn't performance. It was recalibration. Afterward, a young reporter approached her. "Miss Lewis," he asked, "do you ever think about that moment on the plane?" She smiled faintly. "Every time I sit down," she said. "It reminds me how fragile civility is and how much stronger it becomes when you protect it." Outside, the night wind carried the echoes of applause through the lobby doors. The world was still talking, still learning. And as Amara stepped into her car, the city lights reflected in the window beside her face, bright, unbroken, and rising the way truth always does once it's finally seen. Weeks passed. The world kept moving, but Flight 827 had carved itself into memory, a quiet scar across headlines and hearts. What began as a confrontation had evolved into curriculum. Airlines rewrote their training manuals. Corporations cited the Lewis Protocol, a case study in restraint, leadership, and silent correction. Amara never spoke publicly about it again. She didn't need to. Her silence had already become language. It was a late Friday afternoon in New York when she returned to the Lunaris headquarters. The lobby buzzed with activity interns in motion, screens flickering with market updates, elevators humming with precision. The kind of order she'd built from the ground up. Miles met her at the entrance, tablet in hand. "The Foundation's report came in," he said. "Enrollment in our aviation scholarship for women of color tripled since the incident. Media's calling it the Amara effect." She smiled slightly. "That's their term, not ours." He nodded. "Still, it's working. Real change, measurable impact." They walked past the company's new display, a sleek installation of glass and steel titled Seat 2B. Inside sat a single aircraft seat under soft white light. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "Respect isn't situational. AL." Visitors often stopped there longer than anywhere else in the building. Some left quiet notes, others just stared, reflecting. Miles glanced at the exhibit. "You realize it's become a symbol, right? People bring their daughters to see it." Amara paused, eyes softening. "Then, maybe it's doing its job." And to Graverton. She moved toward her office, minimalist, sunlit, overlooking the city that once doubted her. On the desk sat a single envelope, handwritten. No logo, no pretense, just her name. She opened it. "Dear Miss Lewis, I was on that flight. I didn't speak up when I should have. I've thought about it every day since. Thank you for showing me that dignity can change a room faster than anger ever could." No signature, just space for thought. Amara folded the letter neatly and placed it in a drawer beside a worn photograph of her grandmother, the woman who'd taught her to stand tall and, when necessary, to stay seated. Outside, the city glowed gold against the setting sun. The skyline looked almost like a runway, long, endless, waiting. Miles knocked softly on the door. "You're staying late?" "Just finishing something," she said. He smiled. "You already did." "These rise, even Sate." As he left, Amara stood by the window, hands resting lightly on the frame. Down below, she could see the lights of LaGuardia blinking in the distance, planes lifting into the dark, one after another. For a moment, she imagined them all carrying someone who might one day face their own version of 2B, a moment of choice, a test of dignity. She whispered, almost to herself, "Stay calm, stay seated, let the truth take off." And with that, the woman who had grounded a plane without raising her voice smiled not at power, not at victory, but at proof that grace, when unshaken, always finds altitude. And as the night faded, one line lingered, not from a headline, not from a speech, but from the truth that had defined her. Dignity doesn't shout. It simply stands, and the world learns to listen.